Welcome to the Expert and the Idiot. We're here today with Jay-Z Proctor of Jay-Z's Reptiles. And today we're going to be talking about Rhino Rat Snakes, right?
Yep.
And but before we get into that, what got you into the hobby? When did it all start, and kind of what's been your journey? Because I know you're big into education now too, right?
Yep. So probably the way you're going to hear a lot of other reptile people started out like, catching like garter snakes and stuff as a kid. And then fast forward until basically I was out of high school where I got my first reptiles, which were like a leopard gecko and a ball python. And they're really fun to keep. And then, watching like Brian Barczyk's old videos from like 2007, 2008. By the way, a lot of people really kind of jump started into the hobby. I didn't go whole hog into ball pythons. I decided to go the boa route. But as someone who's never had a niche, I just kind of gradually spread out over the next few years. And then I've always enjoyed just kind of sharing my like little hyper fixations, and reptiles is a really, really good one. And turns out that I can just talk for hours and hours about reptiles and turn it into something of an almost viable career path, along with other things like, actually breeding the reptiles and making cookies and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen you got some pretty wicked cookies on Instagram and everything.
Yeah, when the snakes aren't selling, then you have to do something to expose.
Yeah. So it started out with a ball python and a leopard gecko.
That's originally how it got started as like an actual keeper. My very first ones were I had a pair of leopard geckos and I had a ball python, and then that very quickly changed to two ball pythons, to another boa, to another boa, to a hognose, to a corn snake, to another boa, and expanding from there.
Yeah.
And then after we had some issues with boas, like with arenavirus and stuff, and we kind of had to start over from the ground up. That's where I was introduced to the wide and wonderful, colorful world kaleidoscope that is colubrids. And that's where, talking to a lot of like the old school people that are around in Denver, where I was living at the time, that's where I really got introduced to a lot of like the old world colubrids and some of like the specialty locales of like North American rat snakes and stuff. And so that's where I kind of ended up falling in love, like hearing about like pro exotics, which is a little old for a lot of people that are coming in now. They used to be a really big reptile shop back in the hobby. They were among the first places in the U.S. that got a lot of species of snakes and reptiles in general, and that does include the Rhino Rat Snake. The very first Rhino Rats that came into this country came into pro exotics, and then subsequently shipped off to like the Denver Zoo and then other places like that. And then after pro exotics had their fire, High Plains Herp, which was one of their more well-rounded employees, branched off. He branched off to his own thing, and that's where a good majority of the Rhino Rat Snakes can trace their lineage back through High Plains Herps.
Nice.
Yep.
So you keep black milks too, right?
I have a pair. They are a slow-growing species for a colubrid, so theoretically in the next year I'll be pairing them up. Nice. Longest species of milk, and they sometimes can take, according to a couple other milk keepers that I've talked to, 4 to 5 years before the female gets a good size to where they can have a larger clutch. They tend not to double clutch as much as like some of the North American species, like the Puebloans and the Nelsons, but they can. But it takes them a little bit longer to get to size.
Yeah, they're one of my, they're probably, I don't have any colubrids, but if I get one, it's going to be black milks. I love them. They're just so cool and different.
People tend to like either love them or hate them, where they really like the tricolor bandings, which guilty is charged as well. But also people just like that really big black snake. So then it's really cool. They're a montane species, so you can keep them at cooler temps, and you don't have to worry about like as big of a heating bill. And they're usually fairly placid as far as even like any of the Lampropeltis go too. So they're a fun little species to dink around with.
Yeah, it's a win-win all around. So you started out with the ball python and the leopard gecko, and then how did you end up in doing the education and everything? And like where did you branch out from there, from the ball pythons and all that? And you had the boas. You have some bigger stuff now, right? Burmese.
Yep. Yeah, we have a couple berms. I'm not breeding them. The biggest species that I'll breed are like the boas, and then theoretically the black-headed pythons, who live together like 9-10 months a year and just stare at each other and don't do anything. Um, but what happened was, at least I'm going to assume was the case, was so originally my 9 to 5 was I was a chef for like 18 years, and one could even argue that I'm still technically doing that. But after high school, I did like an apprenticeship, and I worked at a couple different hotels, and then I ended up getting recruited by a former executive chef who ended up working at the Denver Museum. And originally, when I very first started there, it was super cool to see this multi-departmented place that theoretically is just dedicated to education and further knowledge and things like that. And everyone was just like super passionate about it. You know, the world's leading, not the world's, but the country's leading scientist on the black widows, whose genus I will butcher. It's like Lactrodectus or something like that, is the head curator of entomology at the Denver Museum. We were talking to them and talking to the paleontologist and all these really cool, very passionate people that if you give them the time of day, they'll just talk your ear off about whatever it is they're passionate about. And that kind of passion is contagious for whatever it is, even if that's not necessarily your main focus or interest. It's just a contagious thing. And so even though I was working, you know, they kept me in the back away from people primarily because I talk like this to everybody. But just talking to other people in the kitchen or in other departments about, because that, you know, as anyone who keeps reptiles for any amount of time, eventually you become like, you're the reptile guy of whatever group it is, works, coworkers or whatever. You would end up being asked questions a lot. And they kind of gave me a small platform to just talk about reptiles a lot. They had a couple like specialty events where they asked if I could talk about it, you know, talking about keeping different types of reptiles, what made them so special, about like, you know, scalation of like Heloderma and Angola pythons versus like corn snakes or ball pythons, and why they have those particular attributes, as well as other stuff. Like we did an event with ducks, because we keep ducks here on our ranch as well. And so talking about that and stuff, which ducks are just feathered reptiles, well, they're dinosaurs, but whatever. And so it just kind of gave me a chance to do that a lot. And I seemed to actually really enjoy that more than I've ever really kind of enjoyed anything. And so they said, well, why don't you do a YouTube? And so I essentially started to do that, where the very first couple YouTube videos that I ever put out there, I took them down at this point because they're just awful to watch, were essentially like people coming into my living room, and I was just talking back and forth with them about reptiles, about either how misunderstood they were, how cool they were, soft pitching, selling like baby boas and ball pythons sometimes too. And it just kind of grew from there, and that's about it. It was just kind of that was I'm pretty sure the progression of it.
So now you go out and to schools and things like that now, and interact with people, and you bring animals along.
I do. It's not as frequent as I would like. A couple of reasons is, number one, I live out in the boonies now. So it's, you know, it's about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive to Denver from where I'm at now. Wow. So that's where people are. So it's a big, long drive to get out there. But I do a lot of virtual stuff. I've done a lot of stuff around like Southern Colorado, in all sorts of different places, you know, church groups, schools, summer camps. And it just kind of varies in what we're talking about. You know, I've talked to, you know, like pre-K and Montessori schools where, you know, the kids are, you know, 5, 6, 7 years old, where their attention span is about 4 minutes, where I've also done stuff for graduates, like people who are going to be attending CSU in hopefully the career path of herpetology, because they actually have a herpetology course. It's like a specialty. It falls under the category of biology, but there is an actual herpetological course at CSU. And I've talked to grad students essentially to get a more hands-on about a specific case that they were looking into for their herpetological course.
So, and the ranch, can people come and visit that?
I mean, theoretically, I'm not necessarily like advertising open to the public, but we've had people stop by before, you know, old friends, coworkers, other people in the reptile community. I know one of my associates here in Colorado, Lori Turini, she's much further north of me. She's like 45 minutes east of Colorado Springs. But do you remember Carpet Fest a few years ago?
Oh, yeah.
So there was a time, because she's super into Morellii, specifically Bredlii, and she wanted to have like a central Carpet Fest, and she tried to get the groundwork for that. And in our talks back and forth and like our collaborative groups and works and stuff, we've talked about potentially doing another one here again at some point down the road, like another central Carpet Fest. And we talked about where we could potentially do that, because, you know, we've, like, you know, in Florida, they would like went to Ian's place and they would hang out and look at his collection and do stuff. And we were toying around with the idea that people could come and like camp out on my property and see my dumb collection of mostly ball pythons. But, you know, we could go to Colorado gators because they're like 30 minutes away from me, and we can learn about and actually work with crocodilian species and go herping in like in a high desert environment where, you know, where at certain parts of where I live at, we're at over 9,000 feet. And you can still find a lot of different species, including even one specific, potentially its own established subspecies of shorthorned lizard called the San Luis Valley shorthorned lizard, depending on who you want to fight with on Facebook about whether or not that's an actual established subspecies or not. And so that's something that we've talked about. So, I mean, theoretically, the door is open for people if they ever want to, you know, make that drive or fly to like the regional airport that's fairly close to me, all things considered. Had an intern that was a high school student, and they didn't know what they wanted to do. And they actually go to school up in the Greeley area. So people unfamiliar with Colorado, most of Colorado lives along the Front Range corridor along I-25, and it starts in Fort Collins. It goes down to Pueblo, and that's where most people live. And I'm like an hour and a half west of Pueblo, or southwest of Pueblo. They go to school in Greeley, which is up at Fort Collins, so the very other end of the state. And they found me at a reptile show, and they actually interned for 2 days, one day with me, learning about reptiles and how to go about talking to people and different things like that. And then the next day took them to Colorado gators, and they got to have hands-on experience about educating the public about, you know, just here's a corn snake, here's a ball python, talk about them to people about how cool they are. And so that's something that also could be done theoretically.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how many species do you keep right now?
Oh, Lord.
Any idea?
It's around, if we're just going with reptiles and amphibians, I want to say it's around 40-ish. I'm actively working on updating the feeding list now. I'm in, not necessarily an old school guy, but I'm old period. So, you know, I don't have an app for all my feeding data or stuff like that. I have Excel spreadsheets, and I have Excel spreadsheets for pythons, boas, colubrids, the cool room, which also has colubrids and stuff in there too, as well as quarantine. But I want to say it's around 40-ish species. I'm not actively breeding all of them. Some I just kind of keep, you know, like the mainland retic, never going to breed her. The berms, never going to breed them. Not making a super push to breeding different other types of reptiles, like the, you know, like the northern white lip, probably never going to breed them. But I just like to keep a bunch of different stuff, because it just kind of depends on how I'm feeling in the day of what I am like super into at the moment. I still love every single species I work with, from, you know, the leucistic Texas rat snake that wants to eat my face, to every once in a while I'll talk to like a colleague who is super into the ball python game. And that's where I get a lot of my like morph education is from him. And so, you know, I'll be at his shop for 2-3 hours just listening to his stories and the stuff that they're working on and stuff that's being talked about outside of just my little plot in the middle of nowhere. And so I get to have fun playing with ball pythons for a while, or playing with Pituophis, like the northern pine snakes, Louisiana pine snakes and stuff that all have a lot of fun attitude. Or I just like to look at something pretty like the Rhino Rat Snakes that like to just kind of perch up and stuff. So it just kind of depends on what I am kind of feeling in the day of what I really like to work with. But that's honestly why I've never really had a real niche, because I would probably get bored, which isn't good.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had Nick Mutton on, so I mean, he
Oh, yeah.
keeps a ton of stuff, but man, he's laser focused on those carpet pythons,
Yeah, I mean, he's been a diehard Morelia and to a lesser extent Chondro person for a long time. But is he still playing with a lot of Apodora? I think he was starting to do some stuff with those as well.
I don't know how much he has. We didn't get into that. I mean, I think he said he had. I think he's bred now, possibly or soon to be. It was either 26 or 28 species of python, which
That's
is
crazy.
yeah, it's nuts. How many? So give me a rundown. What pythons do you keep?
Oh, okay, just pythons. Let's see. We'll go balls, berms, retic, Angolan, white lip. That might be it. I've kept short tails in the past.
What was
And
that
I've
like?
honestly fine. I know they get a really big bad reputation, but I had two different red bloods. Both were actually matrix, and they were perfectly fine. And they were all subadults. Like I think the oldest one was maybe 2, and she got to be about 3 feet long and pretty chunky. Before someone specifically that was looking for one, and they were super passionate into short tails and bloods, and so I said, okay, here you go. And then through a collection acquisition, I actually got in a big adult Sumatran short tail. That's the black bloods, right? Yeah, I think that's right. There's the 3 different ones, and I always end up getting mixed up between the Borneo and the Sumatran, but
So do I.
Just a big.
I call them all short tails.
They are all short tails, but the more you talk to people, you'll see how, like, I don't mean to go there, but like irate and super specific about stuff, about speciation and stuff like that. They get super butthurt if you even like mispronounce something. Like, say Crotalus cartalis to somebody about rattlesnakes, just see what happens. Or talk about a purebred jungle carpet. So just watch. Just like as soon as I said that, someone like their ears perked up.
Yeah.
I had a big wild caught black blood female for like 6-7 months before that same person ended up taking her as well. And honestly, it's because I keep so many different species. I'm pretty good at reading body language for most animals. Each species generally has kind of different like tells of when they're stressed or scared or when they're done. The short tails primarily, they all kind of have the same one, is they don't move a whole lot, period, even when actively handling them. They move very slowly, like something like a ball python, but even probably just a little bit slower. Ooh, I forgot. Also keep carpets and bredlii. Sorry, but backtrack. They will kind of super slow, almost freeze, and then they will kind of stick their tongue out and they'll just kind of hold it just barely outside of their mouth. Like where the fork would stop, it'll just kind of come and it'll just hold still. And that's usually that's them tensing up and flexing and saying, okay, one more, and then you're going to get popped to say back off. And that was something that was shared with all 3 that I kept over that like 3-year span. And that was just something I always noticed, and it was pretty easy to work with them. But it wasn't really that big of a deal. The reason why I never kept them super successfully was it was when I was still in Denver, and I had a really hard time keeping my basement cool. And so they would get close to, they would never be in danger of overheating, but they certainly got too warm and they would be stressed more often and would sometimes not eat. Because one of the hardest things, other than the, oh no, they're snappy and mean or whatever reputation, is that they do prefer cooler temps for a python. And they like that humidity. It's almost keeping like a rainbow boa from Southeast Asia, where they like it a little bit cooler with that high humidity. And a lot of people struggle with that. And so I was admittedly struggling with that, where just the ambient temp of the room would, in the middle of summer, would just get a little too warm for them.
Yeah, I just had Matt Minatola on, and we were talking about short tails and their temperature requirements, and he said for them, I believe a basking spot of like 84, 85, which is
Yep,
just, that's obscene. Like it seems so crazy because that's cool to the touch, you know?
it
So it's,
is. And I mean, theoretically, I'm technically here to be mostly talking about the rhino rats, but I mean, it's
oh,
easy
we'll
for me
get to that. That'll be its own part. Right
for
now we're
sure.
just talking.
Yeah, but a lot of those old world rats, a lot of the Elaphai, especially the more crepuscular species, they prefer those cooler temps where like the high is 82 to 85 and 85 is pushing it. It's almost like keeping amphibians where you don't want them to get over 80. It's really weird. And like the rainbow boas can be like that. The short tails can be like that. And honestly, the red tails, they don't even need that high of temps either. Like during the summer, they don't get heat. They're off heat. They just stick on Ambien all summer long, and I've had no issues.
Like Peruvian Surinams, things like that, the true red
And
tails.
heck, even like the Imperators into like the Central American locales, they're off heat during the day, during the summer, and they're just fine. Still metabolize, still process their food super slow, like all boas, but they do just fine. The rainbows don't have heat all year.
Wow. So what do you keep as far as boas?
Brazilian rainbow boas. I have a trio, although one is like a failed breeder, like an actual rainbow breeder. Tried to breed her over and over and over again, and then it went to somebody else, and they just mistreated this girl so bad. Like, got her too hot, got her too wet. She got super thin. Got it back to this breeder. Like they gave it back to them, and then they gave it to me, and so she's been slowly recovering since. And then I have another pair of nondescript captive born locale, so just Brazilian rainbows. I have a Colombian rainbow who's like triple het for a bunch of stuff, but she only has one eye. And that breeder, Top Line Constrictors, because I don't mind name dropping them, who work with Brazilians and all the locale boas, they gave her to me because they didn't want someone breeding her because she has that potential, but because they have that one eye, because chasing that almighty dollar. Who I named Rita Right Eye Rodriguez because she has a right eye, not a left eye. We have a lot of imperators of different morphs. We have essentially a trio of Suriname boas. One, you could sit there and argue that it's more like Guyana in looks versus origin. I don't know if you know too much about boas, but Guyana and Suriname boas, they often come from the same place.
Mm.
Like year over year, it'll just be whichever one has the export one. Like the same people will wild collect them. Like the same 4 people will gather them from the same places. And so unless you have a specific bloodline from a specific region, they can be the same thing. And a lot of times they just classify the Surinames as the more lighter ones with the redder tails, with the more like widow peaked hairline saddles as the Surreys. And then the Guyanas are the more like maroon tails, thicker saddles, even though they're coming from the same place. But we have a trio of them that we're kind of playing around with. We have a pair of Argentine boas that were growing up.
Ooh, talk about those who like
Argentines.
I just got a 3-year-old female and I adore
Cool.
her, and I'm looking at getting a male probably from Bob Goyer if I can get one from him.
Yep, and that's where my male is. He's a 4th gen Max Pink. They were really, really cool. So boas are definitely the snake that really got me to fall in love with reptiles. And when I was still looking for just like expanding collection, there is a dude out in the foothills in Colorado who I can't remember his name, but he does shows, he does rescue, and he would do like pest/wildlife relocation. But it turns out he was never licensed with the state to remove venomous, so I don't know how that went. But he had just a bunch of boas all together, which super not good knowing what we know now. But he had one kind of off because it was more of his pet, and it was a big 9-foot Argentine female, and that was so cool because everyone thinks of them as like the black and gray, with the exception of like Bob's line bred stuff, but they can be very variable. You just don't see it as often because you just don't see him that often in general. But his was actually pretty high white and just looked super, super cool. And then so pursuing those channels, I ended up getting a hybrid boa of an Argentine and a short-tail boa, not the short-tail python, so boa amarellii. And she's like the perfect kind of mix of the two. And then learning about Bob, and then learning about the Max Pink, and then throughout my travels up in Fairbanks, Alaska, talked to a person there and visited their place, and they have 2 Max Pink boas from Bob from 2 different pairings over the course of like a 3-year span. And unfortunately, the last time they tried to pair them, female reabsorbed. But my then game plan was, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a normal one, and then a female from them, and then a male from Bob. So from 2 different ones, because they still kept who was their pairing. Bob knows who's his are. So that way I could have as distant apart as I could to outcross 1 year to go straight back into the other the next year. Because boas, they take a long time. It's not good to go them year after year, but boys can go all the time. So that way the boy could live with one year, and then the next year could live with the normal, the more outcrossed one, and then I could work on kind of my own little group that way. Didn't end up getting the one from Fairbanks, but they're still working on that. But there's another person that ended up getting a normal POS het T positive, but I don't really care about the T positive. Like whenever I do low count stuff, I don't really care about morphs. And they're currently growing out. These guys are super, super slow growing, even for boas. The Argentines, they're the most furthest south subspecies of all of the true red tails. They like it cooler. And oftentimes, like a lot of boa people, they don't breed females until 5, 6. Sometimes they're not breeding till like 8 or 9, like an olive python and stuff. So I got some time going with that. But so I have a high peach looking boy, a 4th gen Max Pink boa from Bob, and then I just have a really dark female to hopefully outcross and then do stuff that way.
That's awesome. So what do you keep your temps at for the Argentines?
Argentines, essentially, they are just at the room temp in my shop on the very bottom of the rack, working on getting more cages, and then they'll be moving to 6 and 8 foot cages down the road. But essentially, at the bottom, because I let it fluctuate seasonally, so that way, like the colubrids, they go through like a cool down, but not a true brumation, to where like they're stuck over in like the far corner, and that's where the Argentines are, like the boas are right up against them, so it's a little bit cooler than next to the pythons and like the lights from the tegus and stuff. During right now into summer, it probably goes from like 79 overnight, and then getting up to a high of about 86 during the day. And then come summer, it will definitely get to about 89. If I have the heat on. If I take the heat off, it usually stays right around that like 86 to 87 temperature for them. And then in the winter, it will go about 8 degrees lower than that. So I never let it get below like 69, 70 in the building, just kind of period. Other than that one back corner that gets a little cool down to like the mid 60s for the colubrids. So the boas will probably get down to about 72, 73 overnight, and then into like the low 80s during the day.
So you're keeping them ambient then, basically?
For the most part, yes. If it's particularly warm, or particularly cold, I will kick on their heat, and they have flex water radiant heat panels just kind of wherever they are in the room. But it does depend on what the species. Like the rainbow boas, they don't have heat period. I keep them like colubrids, because the building stays pretty warm, period, and I've had no issues with them. The Argentines, they are kept in currently a rack system with some of the other boas. They're just at the bottom where it's the coolest. And then like the Central Americans, before they move to cages, they're at the top because they can take that wider temperature gradient, because they come from an area that has wider both humidity and temperature fluctuations and swings. So when you keep as many species as I do, it's really hard to sit there and say that that you can dial it in exactly perfectly every single way. So essentially, where I look at where they live in the wild during their periods of activity, during their like what is the humidity and temperature gradients during those periods of activity, and that will determine where I put them in the room and then what I do per the cage. So like all of the old world colubrids, they are in with the crested geckos and gargoyle geckos, where it has a separate AC unit that keeps the temp in there like 72 to 75. And then they have like little hot spots that they can get in their individual cages. You know, the ball pythons, a lot of them are in racks where they have flex swap that are thermostat between like 88 and 92, depending on where they are in the rack. Higher they up, the temp's set a little bit lower because heat rises, and yada, yada, yada. And so that's where how I keep is probably different from a lot of people, but it's because it's super dependent on where they are in the room and what type of enclosure I'm keeping them in.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of thought into it for sure.
Well, I mean, that's honestly part of the fun where, you know, if you, a lot of people, like if you have a niche, you know, like Nick Mutton, he works with a lot of species, but it's pretty focused, and a lot of them share a lot of shared not only habitat but husbandry requirements. And so he's very good at exactly knowing what each individual species, but what that species really requires. And he's hit the head on them. He's hit the nail on the head every single time. He's gotten really successful at that. But if you're working with Morelia, Senzenia, Boa, Apodora, Goniosoma, all these different ones, it takes a lot. I'm pretty sure you have a snake poking out.
Oh yeah, I opened it up. Yeah, she was.
Yeah,
that's the Argentine.
A lot of people do that. Super cool. But I've been on podcasts before where people didn't realize that. Someone had, I think it was a rainbow boa that was just slightly ajar, where it managed to sit there like over the course of like 30 minutes, just kind of work its way out and popped out. And so kind of had to stop really quick and go secure hilarious. That. Oh, there it is. I see it's going on.
Yeah, I think she heard we were talking about her with her no ears and came over to the door. So I figured I'd let her poke her head out.
For sure.
She's from Travis Johnson.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah. So I've heard he's got really good animals, and ironically, you know, I happened to pick her up from a guy, you know, that was looking to rehome her, and he had all the information on her. So I reached out to him. Nice. And yeah, it was good. It was a joint pairing with Brian Cusco. So it was pretty cool. I like her a lot. I didn't think I was honestly going to like her as much as I do. They're really awesome.
I really enjoy them. They're really, really cool.
Have you done a video on Argentines yet?
I did one. And it's basically I just used the two like the juvenile and the subadult that I have primarily, and then I kind of pulled video and pictures from other places I've gone, plus YouTube and like Bob and stuff. So I avoided doing a lot of the boa stuff for a while because, like we talked about previously, people can get really up in arms about it. Like I sat there on the carpet python video for almost 2 years before I finally did that one. Look up chondro snobs. Even though carpets were never considered like the chondro, that was always the GTPs. They still get super up in arms about stuff. But yeah, no, I did one on. I haven't done a whole lot with a lot of the more common species, but because Argentines are definitely different enough of a subspecies, and now this new study that came out that this guy is now claiming that there is a new subspecies of BCC, the South Brazilian, doing mitochondrial analysis. The Argentines are actually far enough apart where, according to his research, they would be classified enough to be their own full separate species. And based on like location, morphology, and a little bit behavior, there is some reason actually to back that claim up, but I'm not going to side one way or the other on that just yet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, your videos are awesome because you put so much effort into them and it really comes across. I've watched your ones on, I think it was children's or spotteds, or it might've just been the whole, all the above. But and also I remember when I was looking for my IMG boa, I found your video on the black and white boas and your Angolan pythons and black milk. So it's great. You've got a great resource there. How much time goes into a single video? I mean, it seems like you do tons of research. You're not sitting there, and deep in thought about what you're going to say next. It's obvious that you put a lot of effort into the script
Right.
and what you're going to talk about.
It's a lot, and that's honestly why I haven't had as many longer format like top 5 lists or species spotlights lately, because the summer always gets super busy at the start of it for me, where just especially if it's on like a top 5 list, or if it's on species that I'm not super familiar with, it is sometimes 6 to 10 hours over the course of days researching single things, because you can't just Wikipedia it. And as you go through, you will see there is a lot of just straight copy and paste from like Animal Facts or Wikipedia, or I think it's like A to Z or whatever, where it's all literally the exact same, just copy and paste text. And so it's going through Google Scholar and going through like iNaturalist and tracking down people that have worked with the species and comparing the different data with that, looking at where they're found naturally, looking at the temperatures that theoretically be active. And it's easy to mess stuff up, and I do that a lot. I've misspoken. I'm usually pretty good about catching that, but editing is a whole other thing. So just the whole research, compiling all that, writing it down, and then scripting that. It's usually 1 to 3 pages of text, like handwritten script, which kind of helps keep it in your head so you can sit there and fluently say it. And then recording, assuming that I hit it pretty well the first try, a 15-minute video is usually about 20 to 30 minutes of raw video. And then editing that down, which it's very difficult to edit yourself because your brain just it doesn't catch your misspeaks or your misquotes. It just interprets that as correct because you said it 30 minutes to a couple hours previously.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you miss stuff. Like the one time I said that veiled chameleons were from Madagascar. That didn't go very well. That video came down pretty quick. And that is a whole thing. So it's depending on, if it's like a top 5 list where I'm going through 5 different species, and even then I'm not getting super specific about it. It's basically, if I have the time dedicated to it, like a 3-day process of a day and a half of research and scripting, and then an afternoon of filming, and then another day of editing.
Yeah, the editing it's a beast.
Yep.
Yeah, because when I'm
learning firsthand.
Yeah, because I'm doing the podcast, which I want to be as unedited as possible. That way it's more just human conversation. But then I'm doing the care guides with the individual that I'm interviewing and taking that out and then trying to trim out pauses and filler words and things like that. And yeah, it's a whole process. It's just a day doing that.
Yep, it definitely is. There's a lot about getting into the different niches of this hobby that they don't really tell you, or that you think about at first. If you're just a basic keeper, you learn to be just an amateur electrician, carpenter, and plumber. And then you want to get an education, then you have to learn about social media and different algorithms and doing all of that, and monetization, and then you get the video editing and everything else. It's just all the different routes that you would want to go, let alone just keeping individual species. But if you want to kind of go one route in this hobby, there's just so much constant new stuff that you're always having to relearn.
Yeah. If you're booking or if somebody's booking you to come out and do an educational event, what is that process like? Sort of behind the scenes, how are you determining what animals you're going to bring, transport, making sure that that they're doing okay with it? Do you have go-to animals that enjoy that process, or not enjoy it but put up with it better than others?
Yep. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. where essentially I have business cards just kind of out in the wild that'll take you to like my link tree, because I've been failing and struggling to make a website for like 5 years. But it'll go to my link tree, and then you can fill out, what, if you're interested if you're interested in buying cookies or whatever, or if you're interested in an outreach program for whatever may have you. Or a lot of times people will just email me or find me at like a reptile show or something, and they say, okay, here's the thing, this is what I want to do. And then it's just kind of a little bit of back and forth about what are they looking for? How old are the people? Because a lot of times it's kids, it's younger people, which is so how many of them are there? How young are they? How long are you thinking? What type of stuff are you interested in? And like this most recent time, someone reached out to Colorado Gators because they found about Colorado Gators, and so they wanted to have alligators come. Colorado Gators doesn't really do those things. They'll usually kick it down the street down to me. And so going back and forth with him, okay, he wants to do like safari animals, but mostly the alligators. Well, you can't legally have the alligators leave the farm. So
really,
well, what's a caiman? And then kind of back and forth. And eventually he just kind of settled on, let me see what we can do. Ended up not going with us. But it would be, for another one where it's like it's a school group and it's for like 3rd to 5th graders, and there's 100 of them. And they want to learn about cold-blooded animals and what the sun is. And so, okay, we'll get like a blue-tongued skink that we can talk about how they thermoregulate and they like to bask in the sun. And now that their tongues can actually be looked at differently under ultraviolet light from the sun. And then a couple different snake species, some that like it cold, some that like it warm. Different stuff like that, to where it's just kind of going over what the what the client is interested in and wants to get across. And also, like you nailed it again, I have a certain group of animals in my collection that are essentially part of the ambassador program, where, I don't really do anything with scaleless, but I have 2 scaleless animals to show and talk about that mutation, what it's actually like, depending on who it is, like about keeping them. And I have the 2 because if one's in shed or one's not feeling it, there you go. I have, a whole handful of boas that are a more medium to large size animal that if they want a larger snake, they can do that. We recently picked up Hermes python that we're still working with that because he was out and about a lot. But he is pretty huffy. He's not cage defensive. He's definitely like a really huffy animal. So we're working on that so we can bring a really, really big animal to the different presentations. For a while, I tried to keep a colony of 2 different colonies of cockroaches for like bugs and stuff. I have a tendency to just kind of forget they exist at my multiple failed dubia colonies. Because once you have that many animals outside of the regular like purview of regular keeping, you tend to just kind of forget stuff, where like that's why I don't have a tarantula, because they're super cool and I would love to have them, and even a couple to use for outreach programs. Something like a red knee or a fire leg or a rosy, I just tend to forget about them because it's not part of the process of just thawing rodents. It's multiple feedings of insects a week, and I just kind of forget about that with everything else. But as again, you pointed out, essentially to round it out, it's reaching out, going back and forth of what they're looking for, how long it is, how old the people are, and then looking at your animals of which ones are the most tolerant, the most amiable, how long they can be out, where I have some that are stupendous. Like I bring my green anaconda out to some shows, but he doesn't always come out once we get there. And when he's out, it's usually in very specific situations, and he's very good at letting me know when he's done. And so for a bunch of younger people, would not bring him out. But like a presentation at a reptile expo, Sir Mix-a-Lot will come out. And there may have you. And, we can talk about stuff as basic as this is a reptile. They don't eat to make warm. They need to get warm from the sun, or how we help them out to, this is how hydration works, to morphology and as basic layman terms as we can, talking about hypermelanism versus hypomelanism. Because, in Colorado gators, they have leucistic animals, hypomelanistic animals, and albino animals, and talking about, those type of things. And that would be the case for ball pythons or whatever may have you, or wild animals that you see and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Do you ever bring your mainland out?
Excuse me. No, and that is because she actually has a respiratory issue where if she gets cold, it will start to flare up. And that's where she really can't leave the ranch, essentially. She's in a big cage, not as big as it could be, but because she's a retic, she comes out a lot still on the ranch to get a lot of interactions with me, or if we have people coming over and visiting, she'll come out for that. But primarily she has to stay, either if we are traveling, it has to be during like the warm weather months, and even then, transporting large constrictor snakes like that is very stressful for them. Traveling, putting them in all the different the smaller containers, and then into the bigger containers, and then into a car, and then blah, blah, blah. It's very stressful for the animals, period. And it's exceptionally stressful for those very large constrictors, and also varanids, the monitor lizards, where just a not super well advised or timed, or you didn't get everything right, that can lead to the end of that animal. It is so stressful. So primarily she doesn't go. That's why usually the largest animals that go with me are the boas or my male blackhead, because he is very patient. Not the female. She likes to chew on people, and it is chewing. It's not fun. And that's why we got Snickerdoodle, the normal Burmese python, to hopefully go with that. But usually the people that are really looking for those big constrictor snakes, they're usually kids. And, if kids are less than 8-9 years old, even my super funky, like 6 foot wonky little Burmese python, he looks huge for them, even though boas are actually more heavy bodied than he is.
Yeah, the boas just seem like the best ambassador species. Like if you were to take something out, because they're so laid back and easygoing, they don't want to get away necessarily.
They do like to climb a lot, which is not always the best for younger people. That's why usually I'll have a boa and then a corn snake, a bull snake, and a ball python. So that way, if kids, they just want to touch it or hold it, the ball python will sit there. And then if they're older, if it's like a parent, that's what the boa's for. Or if it's the big group photo that you want to do, you can sit there and hang on to the front part of the boa, and they'll usually be pretty placid. But you're right. Yeah, boas I really like boas. They're just a really great all around kind of good animal to have for kind of whatever purposes. Either you want to do locale stuff, you want to do morph stuff, you want to do outreach programs, you want an animal that is relatively intelligent, you want one that's big but doesn't get too big. I really like those.
So do I. I love them. I'm not afraid to say it. I could never choose between boa or python, but if I was going to have one pet snake, it would probably be a boa.
Fair. That's where I usually come down, is boa or a Pituophis. So the gophers, bulls, and pines.
Yeah. So what we talked about the boas you have, or maybe I stopped you before you were done because
we super went off on a tangent.
Yeah.
I also have the green anaconda, and I have a longicata boa, and I have one Kenyan sand boa who just sucks. She's the worst.
Why? Because she hides all the time?
No, that's what they're supposed to do. No, she is super flighty. She likes to bite. She's a problem feeder, and I have kept her almost every conceivable way you can keep a sand boa. On play sand, in topsoil, in aspen, in an aquarium, in an enclosure, in a rack, with heat, without heat, with a hot spot, with an actual basking thing, because a dude over in the UK said that's how he was keeping his, and I went, all right, I'll give it a shot. Yeah, she just kind of sucks.
Nah. I'll
weird.
have to tell my son that. My oldest wants one. But
I mean, they're really cool. They're really popular. Whenever I'm at a show, people are always asking for them, and they're really interesting. I would prefer a rosy boa that stays relatively close to that same size and is out and you can see it, and kept under similar conditions. But I mean, most of the time you don't see the sand boa except for when it's hungry, essentially.
Yeah.
I've
So the
had
rose.
other sand boas in the past, and she's just the worst. Where she was given to me from another outreach group that she couldn't be used as an ambassador for all the reasons as described, and that trend has continued.
Yeah. So the rosy boas, they're a better pet in your opinion?
I think so in general. I did also forget to mention I have one Rosie boa as well. Her name's Rosie. She's been overweight since the day I got her, like 6 years ago. The thing about boas, super slow metabolisms, even for snakes. Yeah, she's been on a diet the entire time I've had her, where they don't get big. Like 30 inches is a solid adult female, from nose to tail. They don't move around a whole lot. I've kept my Rosie a couple different ways. Now she's just in a glass cage that's fairly naturalistic setup, and she's just out most of the time unless she's digesting or shedding. Like day or night, she is exposed in one way or the other. They're not super fast moving. The one thing about Rosies is that sometimes they're kind of like sharks, where they just kind of want to investigate if something is food. So they'll just very slowly, just kind of slowly turn their head and open their mouth and kind of take a bite, just like an investigative bite. That's what it is. And they'll kind of keep on going. And that was actually the very first video that I ever recorded. Was I had the Rosie boa. And because I said I'm never going to do bites or feedings on any video I ever do, bugs, I mean, maybe one way or the other, but I'm never going to do like, hey, I'm feeding or whatever, live or otherwise. And immediately within the first 5 minutes, she just kind of goes, meow, and then lets go and keeps on. But it was like right at my knuckle, so it was bleeding a lot. So I had to like quickly pause, and yeah, that was a whole thing. But other than that, they're a really great pet, and it doesn't really happen all that often. It's actually really odd, especially once they know that like this is an interaction. They're very chill.
Nice. I have 3 Timor pythons. Do you have any experience with them?
No, I really want Timors. They're really cool. Yeah, the Malayo python timorensis, right? They're Malayo python, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, they're really cool. Not actually from the island of Timor.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it's I've gotten in trouble about that in the past. That's why it always sticks with me. Not a super heavy bodied. They're like a really cool hybrid of like a carpet, a retic, and a white lip. Where like if you made all three together and had like a love baby, they're really cool. I really would like to work with them. Like the 2 pythons that I really want to play with are those. And then I've actually gotten to play with the rough scales. I just don't have any on my own, although I've learned that a lot of the population we have here in the United States might actually have like some congenital issues. Like they're very inbred. Like it's, they're an Aussie species. We don't have a whole lot of them. So the population pool is very small to begin with. But the Timors are really cool. I'd really like to play with those even more than like my white lip. I'm guessing you have them set up in like a semi-arboreal setup, and they probably spend a lot of time up in the cage, perched up.
Yeah, so I have a 22 male in this cage right here. So he's got a lot of branches that are lag screwed to the side of the enclosure with stainless steel hardware. So he does go up there at night. During the day, he's totally bedded down, though. He'll go under cork bark or under his warm side hide, depending on if he just fed. But yeah, he's all 3 of mine are captive bred because I got them. Cool. Yeah, they're all from Ryan Young. I have the 22 male, and then I have a pair from 23.
Man,
and
Young has got a lot of your paychecks over the years. Then
yeah, over this winter mostly.
Yeah, they're super cool. They're really cool. Do you have any interest in like the Bismarck rings?
None at all. None at all. No, I think that they're super cool. I love all snakes. I think all of them are neat looking, and I like reading about them. But there's some that I see them and I think that's neat, but I have no interest in keeping it.
Scrubs.
Yeah, I'm actually, so I had I'm actually interested in getting a Halmahera scrub.
Oh, cool.
one day, if we'll see, I'm waiting. There's quite a few people that have them, and they're going to try to captive breed them. Obviously, Stephen Cush is the rock star leading that program. So that I'm going to patiently wait and see what happens there, because I think the Halmaheras are just so beautiful. Their coloration is insane, and they don't get enormous. You know, and also I'm in Florida, so they're legal in Florida, which is an upside.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend. They're a lot of the animals that are in my species spotlight videos. They're actually their animals, like the yellow anaconda, the burrowing python, the mandarin rats. Although since I've gotten my own, those are all their animals, and they have a Halmahera. And the stories, and every time I'm actually at their facility and I see that animal, it reinforces that I'm like, no, that's probably not for me. I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Nick Mutton on a podcast like years ago, who said that no snake would be more willing to bite you, pee on you, and then rub the pee and the bite more than a scrub python, and he keeps them. But yeah, I think it must have been Nick Mutton. I mean, this was years ago, probably like 2012 or something.
Yeah.
But,
and, you know, I mean, you know, Steven, he would probably say the opposite of all that, you know, because he works with his a lot, you know, and he even said that's the reason, you know, you go to his Instagram page or his Facebook and he's got them in his hand, you know, chilling and moving around, because he's trying to break that stigma away. It's kind of like the Timor pythons. I work with mine, so they haven't peed on me since February. So it's, you know, it's with patience and the work and all that. I'm sure a Halmahera would be the same thing, you know, and I don't have 500 snakes to wear. That's impossible for me to spend that time.
Yeah, and it would be pretty hypocritical for me to poo-poo on the scrub so much when I just sat there and defended short tails like 30 minutes ago, because you are 100% correct. It's just working with those animals, not even just the species or whatever, but those animals specifically, where you build that bond of trust. Because like with the Timors and the scrubs and like retics and even the Bolins, you can see them thinking and figuring stuff out. And even when you're not interacting with them, just watching them, you can see them watching you and the world, and just like those clockworks moving. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. How has your interaction been with your Argentines? Have they been pretty huffy with you? Have they been defensive at all? Or
the boy, he's like real quick to like, oh, is that food? But as soon as, you know, he's still small, he's still in a tub. He's in a 74 quart tub, but he's still in a tub. As soon as I pull it out and that thing opens up, like fully, that means it's not food. Oh, okay. And then easy peasy, no issues whatsoever, even from the day I got him. And then with the female, that for about 6 months before I got her was basically just kind of ignored. So super hands off to begin with, because it was bought as like a breeder, and breeders and keepers, while they are both needed for the hobby, interact with their animals usually very differently, where they'll still interact with their animals all the time, but it's not the same interactions between the two. And so when I got her, she takes a little bit longer to figure out that it's not food. But once she realizes it's not food, usually she's really great to work with, but she's also very good at letting me know when she's done. And actually, if you go back and you watch the Argentine video, you could probably see shortly before I cut it off, where you could see that she was starting to get over me and the filming, and with like, you know, my iPhone in her face. It's kind of similar to like my retic and my Burmese pythons, where with the retic, I just come over and I open up the cage, and it's like pat, pat, pat on her coils. And then that means she knows, okay, it's not food time. And unless she bucks me off, it means that she's getting cleaned. Or if I just leave it open, then she's going to come out on her own. But with the Burmese pythons, it's not food, not food, not food, not food, not food, not food, not food. Okay, let's go.
How big is your mainland?
Oh, I mean, I haven't sat there with like the string and measured her fully,
I
but
know
I
it's
think
impossible. Just,
I
ballpark.
usually tell people she's between like 13 and 16-ish feet. She's probably in the 14 and a half to 15 range if I was gonna put like my wholehearted guess into it. But it's honestly pretty hard to tell. Like she wraps her full cage. Like if she were to just sit there and go like cinched up, just coil to coil against herself, she would go across her full 10-foot cage fully and then come back around a good chunk. But she never really does that, so it's hard
Wow.
to tell for sure.
What size cage do you think you're going to keep your Argentines in?
Long term, probably an 8 foot for the girl and a 6 foot for the boy is probably long term. Like I have currently my green anaconda is on a breeding loan, although he can be a problem feeder, and my friend is having a hard time with that right now. And I'll be probably getting him back. He's weird to where he doesn't like large enclosures. Even if I give him plenty of cover, he will just go off of food and he freaks out. And so he was kept in a rack for a very, very long time. But I just set up a new 8 foot cage for him. So if I get him back and he stresses out, he'll move back to a 6 foot cage. And then I might move my Argentine, even though she's still relatively small and she would probably be perfectly comfortable in a 6. I might put her in an 8 foot. My eventual goal is to have no even subadult boas in racks, period. Even like my small Central American, like I have a 6-year-old female who's like maybe 4 feet. Eventually, I want no boas in racks, just period, period, period. And most will be in 6 to 8 foot cages.
I just picked up a 6x2x2 for my Argentine. I want to say she's got to be about 5.5 foot, and I
I mean,
think
just looking at her, she's bigger than mine.
yeah, and she's 3, and she was on a pretty moderate, slow growing, not slow growing diet, but she was on a moderate diet. I mean, I have all of her feeding records. She's just a big girl. I think. I think for her age, she's a big girl. Genetically, it
Yeah.
must be.
Honestly, boa growth is all over the place. Where I still have a couple boas from last year's litter, and even though they're siblings, one is definitely probably a good 6 inches longer than the others. Same sex and everything. It's growth rate is just kind of weird. Where even then, like I had one that I got as a 2-year-old that you would think the like it was kept on like essentially a forgotten animal. That thing grew a foot in a year at 2 years old. It was insane.
Wow.
No, not 2 years old. I apologize. If she was 4 years old. Yeah, sorry. That's when I was like, wait, 2 doesn't sound right. But yeah, she grew over a foot longer at 4 years old, which theoretically is close to sexual maturity for most of the most boa species.
Yeah, they're definitely all over the place. It's weird, and as soon as my Imperator hit like a year old, she just got round. So I had to cut her back. I went to went from every 7 to 10 days all the way out to 2 weeks, and then she got her body composition back. She started looking a lot better. But yeah, you just have to read the animal for
Yep.
sure. They're all so different. But
Sure.
this girl too, she's very active. The Argentine, I cannot believe how active she is. She's always moving around and she loves coming out, and so I think she's ready for the 6x2. I think she'll enjoy that.
Their habitat is really weird. Like they're from the Chaco region in Argentina and a little bit into Paraguay, and I want to say fairly unconfirmed a little bit into like southern Bolivia. But they're in the Chaco region, which is essentially like more of the grasslands of the continent of South America. And that's why a lot of times people will think that the Argentines are more terrestrial than even like big, heavy bodied, like 10, 11-foot monsters up in like the Amazon. But they are often found 5 to 10 feet up in large trees. So they are definitely they're an opportunist like every other species of snake and like all the other boas, where they're not just always on the ground because You know, typically you're thinking of, I think it's like what are those little, like the little rabbit guys that are hopping around down there? I think it starts with like a J. I can't remember.
Jackalope?
No. There's down in southern South America, like in Argentina, there are like long-legged rabbit rodents. They don't have ears, and I'm totally spacing on the name, and I know someone's screaming at me right now.
The ones with the antlers, the jackalopes.
I know, right? But like they have found that big adults will predate on them, and so they're thinking that they are not climbing in trees at all once they hit maturity or to a certain size, but they're still always found up, and so they're definitely a very active species.
Yeah, she has a similar setup to this cage right here with the branches and everything, and I'll quite often come in at night and she'll be up there with, you know, her head cocked back like she's waiting for something to walk down on the ground level. It's cool giving them that opportunity to climb. You get to see that behavior, which is neat. What do you keep your green anaconda in?
He is in just a 6-foot cage, just a 6-foot plexiglass cage. For a long time, he was in a Christmas tree tub in Iraq, and he was super comfortable with that. But then he got to the point where even out of the water, curled up, he was touching all sides of it, like 3 sides of it in total, just in like a little ball. And I went, "I'm sorry, buddy. I know you're okay, but I feel absolutely terrible." So I moved him to a 6-footer, and he actually did pretty well. He's always been a problem where he wouldn't eat rodents for like 5 years. He would only eat birds. And that's how a lot of anaconda like neonates start, is they want to eat birds, because if you think about like anacondas, a lot of times they're preying on shorebirds and things before they eventually get large enough to generalize their diet. So it makes sense that that's what he wanted, but he didn't start eating rodents until he moved to that Christmas tree tub. And then he kind of went poof and bulked up, because essentially he went from, you know, like a large, essentially like pullet-sized chick 3 times a month to now he could take a large rat now, to where he doesn't have to eat as often, but they're actually more like kind of fatty. And so he now kind of took over the position of like my big mutt carpet python as a secondary trash can, like theoretically he would supposed to be. But eventually I have an 8-foot jungle cage set up and ready to go for him, but we'll see whether or not when I get him back, probably in the next month or so, when my friend will just kind of throw his hands up in the air of attempting to breed him, where he just spends all of his time in the water, or the female just sits on top of him. We'll see how he does in that, but he's one of those weird outliers of snakes where he does, even if you do all of the things, like he's the type of snake that makes all the good old boy ball python keepers sound right, where even if you give him cover and everything that you need to do to make him feel secure, he just freaks out. My big mainland retic was like that for a while too. She came in a 6-foot vision cage, which I hate those cages. I used to always really love them. Like the solid plastic would be great, but I hate those cages. I put her into an 8-foot cage and she freaked out and she did not want to eat. She never got cage defensive ever. She's never been, but she wouldn't like me messing with her at all. Like, you know, when I said they buck, like they'll take their coils and they'll buck up, and that's them kind of like throwing your hand off. She would just do that constantly. One time she like pressed my hand up against just got it stuck between her coil and like the side of the cage, and I couldn't get my hand out for a few minutes before she finally let me go. And so she went back to the 6-foot cage for almost a full year, but then I moved her again. And then after a while, she got more comfortable. It was actually after the move, we moved from Denver, she went back to a larger cage. And after that big move, she was okay. But yeah,
it's so hard to go, like, you know, people think that there's these clearly defined guidelines for what the animal should be in. And it really depends on their personality, because if you put them in a big cage, you can really be doing them a disservice. And then you're going to have a snake that is not going to eat, or they're going to sacrifice the proper body temperature for a more secure spot. And you have to go, it's case by case.
Yeah. I mean, I've put 200-gram ball pythons in a 4x2x2, just with plenty of cover and opportunities for them to move around and stay secure while thermoregulating properly. And they've been perfectly fine. But those big constrictors that you think you want to give them a room, they're weird.
Yeah. Yeah. And my BI girl, she likes a bigger cage, and she hardly, you know, she'll just sit out in the open all day long. Isn't shy, always eats, you know, and it just depends on the animal.
Oh yeah.
The Timors, the 23 Timors, I'm giving them more time in a bin and letting them feel secure, and it's easier to interact with them then, and then eventually they'll move up.
I feel like it also gives them a chance to acclimate to how your room is set up, where even though like their cage will definitely be much more sensitive to the actual temperatures, just from like where they were moving to where you are now, just it seems like that time period of extra security, extra just kind of like not a whole lot of visual stimuli seems to really benefit those more, I don't want to use the term high strung, but more reactive species. It seems like it really benefits them.
They're high strung. You know, it's, and I was talking with Stephen Cush about this. It's the way he approaches his scrub pythons is you have to be confident, no hesitation. When it's time for them to come out, he goes in, scoops them up, and they're out. If they have that time to feel like, oh my God, maybe I can get away from this, then that's when the panic sets in. It's the exact same thing with the Timor pythons. When I go in there and I go to scoop them up, I got to get them the first try, or they're on their way, and then it's not good.
Yep, that is definitely the case. Definitely the case. That's with a lot of different species outside of like, you know, the kind of normal 15 or so species that most people interact with, that sense of no hesitation, that confidence is really necessary for not only like it sounds like it's kind of inversing it, but it's actually probably less stressful for the animal and definitely less dangerous for you if you just, there you go.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that they sense the confidence too. There's got to be something going on there. They can tell when you're stressed out and, you know, worried about handling them and things like that.
Definitely.
What kind of colubrids do you keep?
That is where most of my speciation comes in. I totally forgot. I also keep one green tree python too. He's just in the house. He's away from all the other snakes, so I forgot about him. He's a jerk. He's just a wild caught yuck. But so colubrids, we have quite a few. We have San Diego, Southern, Louisiana Black, Northern, Cape, Sonoran, Bull. So that is 8 Pituophis species. Actively have bred or working on breeding most of them. I'm still trying to find a female Cape gopher, Pituophis vertebralis for those at home. We have 1 pink leucistic southern pine snake. So when I make the pink snake joke, it doesn't work when I tell it. We have quite a few king snakes, MBK, Leonis, Eastern, not Eastern Florida. We don't have Eastern Kings. We have the Florida Kings. We have like Honduran milk snake, just like pet store milk snake, the black milks, Pseudolaphe. We have a Transpecos girl from Big Rock. I've been doing good about not getting too many additions. I've been trying to work on infrastructure and larger caging this year. But I just picked up a Bendero County Baird's rat snake. Baird's rats are super, super cool. Have you ever seen those guys?
If you showed me a picture, I'd probably say, yep, I sure have.
A lot of North American rat snakes, they all look very similar, where they're kind of like gray with the black saddles. And then eventually some of them, like the Everglades and the yellows, they'll like turn red or yellow and they'll get the stripes. Or like the grays, they can be very variable. And then like the Easterns and blacks, they'll turn kind of black. The Baird's rats will actually turn striped, and then they'll be like a metallic color, where about a third of them will be like a metallic, like red purpley, and the rest will be like gunmetal gray. They look really, really cool. What else do I play with? As far as North Americans go, I know there's plenty more I'm just forgetting about. And then Old World colubrids, we have the Rhino Rats, the Mandarin Rats. I had a trinket snake for a long time. Unfortunately, she passed away, but I got her as like a 12-year-old adult. So might talk to a friend that I just picked up another new species of colubrid, an Esculapian snake, which I have not actually revealed to the public yet. She's a little spitfire. Russian rat snakes, Japanese rat snakes, and I think that's it.
Wow. Yeah, so you're big into the colubrids.
Yeah, they're very diverse, which is what I really like. So, I really like the Pituophis, the bulls, the pines, because they're active, they're intelligent, they're cathemeral, so they're just kind of up at all periods of the day. So they're really fun to interact with. Like the Hondurans, I have they're both tangerine albino Hondurans, but I have one as a white phase. So he looks more like a candy cane than even like those tangerine albino ones because he's more white than he is red. The MBK, I don't know if I list or not, but we have like the MBKs, which are fun, but they're just, standard MBKs. And then, the old world colubrids are really fun and they're all super different. Like I don't have any of the beauty snakes, but, like the Rhino Rat snakes, they are super semi-arboreal. They like to perch. They like to look down on stuff. They like to kind of stay away, hidden a little bit more. I would love to be able to get like all of the Goniosoma genus. So the rhinos, the rains, the red tails, all of those guys, although some are a little bit more difficult to find. I don't even know if anybody is even working with them. Like maybe I have to reach out to like DM Exotics or something. I know he has a little bit of a easier time getting some of those species. Like the Japanese rat snakes, they can be very outgoing and very personable. Like the male, he's definitely like very outgoing, very reactive. The female is super handleable. The Russian rat snakes are always just hungry. Like they're just always hungry. They're like, 6-foot king snakes where they're just like, I want food all the time. They're really cool, but they're like the poor man's Bolins, where they're the solid black with like the yellow to white little stripes, which look super cool. And they are very confident animals where they will just be kind of out whenever they want to, basking, perching, just kind of doing whatever. They're really, really fun. And then the Mandarin rat snakes just kind of hide away.
Do you keep any rear fang venomous?
No, Colorado is super funky when it comes to that. Per Colorado Fish and Wildlife, there's no real rule about rear fanged. Hognose is a whole gray area thing that I really don't want to get into. Basically, what I tell people, don't ask, don't tell. Where like one says that you can wild collect them, but you need a license, but you don't. And then there's another body in the state that essentially acts as like what would theoretically oversee us keepers and breeders. And they say no rear fanged, period. So for a while in the state, like in reptile stores, you would see like falsies and you would see vine snakes. And then one store got in a couple of mangrove snakes and they advertised it as venomous. And then after that, they had to get rid of the snakes. I don't know what everything happened with them, but they really kind of started to crack down on the whole rear fang thing. So
that's too bad.
Regardless of what type of rear fang it is, if it's a hoggy, like a xenodon, or even something that could give a more medically significant bite like a Barron's or a falsie, it's just not really a no-go for us. I've worked with them before. Like I've played with the Malagasy giant hogs and I've played with Barons, but can't keep them here and be upfront and transparent with people like I try to be. So that's why you don't see too much content from me about them.
Yeah, I get that. Falsies are so cool.
They're super cool. They're one of the more interesting species snakes, very intelligent. I know they're one of the species that a lot of people are working with target training and ball training too.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Like Lori Torini, I mentioned her prior. Like she target trains all of her animals. A lot of her clients and patrons, they're also working on that. I through her coaching, I'm attempting to target train one of the little baby boas that I have. And regardless of which color I use, he still always tries to go for it. But he definitely knows that the target means food. Like if I have the target and I have a rodent, he will go for the target before he'll actually go for the food.
Wow.
So it does work, and they've shown that with like falsies before, where like at the zoo or like in like bar checks videos and stuff, they have like the different colored balls and stuff. Where like green ball means to come out and to station to go over and go to like a spot for feeding. They've tried to do that with like the falsies, where like this is the station one, this is the food one, and they've shown that there is definitely some cognitive recognition and going on with them. And like Lori has done that with all of her carpet pythons, both of the different Spilota subspecies. She's done it with Bredlii. She only has one boa, so she doesn't really do that a whole lot with him. That's why she asked me to try. She actually does that with ball pythons. Like she has one ball python in like an 8-foot cage that's super decked out, and that thing comes out all the time. Like like your Argentines just kind of come out and do anything. That's what she does all the time. And she's definitely target trained, and she's super active and super personable and stuff too. So, I mean, technically she's an animal behaviorist before anything else too. And I don't know, but for a while she actually got permission to have a false water for a little while. Can't remember if she still has it or not. She just went through and got permitted with the state to keep a bunch of other stuff too. So she might, again, I don't really remember, but that she was definitely working with that one false water cobra for a little while.
The feed response the false water cobras have is insane. Like I know I've seen the videos where they're dangling a rat and they just let that thing run all around. And
and when that thing gets like 7-8 feet, that's a lot of animal.
Yeah, just the speed that they can move at is insane.
It really is. Yeah.
Are they supposed to have like a body of water that they can be in? I mean, they're called a water cobra. I'm assuming that are they sort of aquatic?
I've only done like small amounts of research into them because I can't keep them. But if I remember, it's along the lines of like anacondas and short tails, where it's like they would naturally be found in bodies of water all of the time. So theoretically, you'd want to do that, but a lot of people keep them successfully without it. So I tend to side on trying to recreate as much as we can the microhabitats that they would be found in the wild in whatever box that we decide to keep them in captivity. I try to side on that versus even traditionally kept, because oftentimes traditionally kept is more surviving versus thriving. Ball pythons.
Sure.
So that's what I would try to go for. So, the limited research that I did about the falsies is that they're often either found in or right next to bodies of water. So that is where I would definitely try to provide a very large water dish or pond for them, is what I would at least attempt to do. And then, if it never spent any time in there, then I would probably adjust from there.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. Well, you want to jump into the Rhino Rat Snake care guide?
Now we talked about everything else. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Sounds good. So let's look at this kind of from the perspective that the individual that's getting this Rhino Rat Snake is keeping it as a pet and, kind of out in their house. So,
okay.
So in your experience, are they a display animal, or are they something that does well with handling and being taken out? And
they are definitely on the side of a display species. I have 3, and most of the time they can be okay with being pulled out, but they're definitely not a hang out, work with, even like, an animal that's always moving and running like a king snake or a horn snake that isn't just going to sit there. They're very reactive, like a lot of arboreal species tend to be, where they will kind of wrap around whatever perch, your hand, arm, or whatever. And a lot of times they will just kind of sit and just be very tense and be very scared and very aware of things that are happening going on with them a lot of the time. It's not always the case, but they are definitely a more look pretty species. I would put them somewhere along the lines of like a very amiable Amazon tree boa, where more than likely they don't really want to be messed with, but you know, if you have a good relationship with that animal and you work with them a lot, they would definitely be more okay with them being pulled out. But if you want like a hands-on type of pet, I would definitely go a different rat snake species, like a Japanese rat snake or something, versus the rhino rat. Um, they tend to be very sensitive. It takes them a long time to adjust to their new environment, where they can go off feed very easily. They will hide a lot when you very first get them, but once they feel comfortable, they're out all of the time. Where you know I will see every single one of them basking in the morning and the evening, entirely perched up for multiple hours during the day. So they're not a beginner species for sure. But they're more of a hands-off species. Like if you wanted to put it on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being don't put your hand in there and 10 being a ball python, I would put them at like a 4 to 5.
Okay. So more along green tree python display animal.
Yeah, you would definitely be able to work with them as a whole. I hate being generalistic, but you would more than likely have a much easier time having your hands in there and having interactions with them than a green tree python. So you know how a lot of chondro people have removable perches. Something like that would also be definitely very beneficial for them. But they do spend more time moving up and down in the cage, not always perched up. So, like as you mentioned before with your Timors, where they are hunkered down for a chunk of the day and then they're perched up, similar behavior.
Okay. Substrate or paper, like a coconut chip or a cocoa chip, or what would you recommend keeping them on?
I would definitely recommend something that can hold humidity. The amount and actual choice of which super depends on where you live and the enclosure that you're keeping them in. So, you know, you're in Florida, so something that can be open air but kept on like coconut or like a mix of like eco earth, reptisoil, topsoil, that sort of thing that can hold humidity, that would be just fine. If you kept it in a like a solid PVC one with just like slits for ventilation, you could still definitely keep it on coconut. I would still probably recommend some form of substrate that holds humidity to a better degree than like aspen or paper. But it would definitely become more soggy and bogged down because they like that high humidity but lower temps. And so if they don't have a lot of ventilation for that humidity to evaporate out, it definitely becomes a swampy potential issue.
So maybe a good opportunity for more of a bioactive substrate with your isopods and springtails.
They would do very well that way. I don't know if you could really classify just isopods in there as truly bioactive or not. Like I have a lot of isopod and bioactive associates, and they tend to get up in arms about that. But one of mine does have a decent colony of oranges rolling around in her cage with 3 or 4 live plants that unfortunately I had to uproot a big snake plant because that's where she decided to lay her eggs, was like in the back corner behind it, and I pull it out. But they would do very well in a bioactive or definitely a very naturalistic, even with if you want to do like springtails and isopods, they would do very well. And I have successfully kept them that way even to this point. And I think they've been in there for almost a year.
Okay. So, and obviously you'd be doing spot cleaning, and maybe the isopods and springtails would kind of clean up whatever's remaining. And all right, yep. Right on. Bioadjacent, maybe that's the term. I think
that's
on
a
the,
good term.
Yeah, bioadjacent. Like
yeah,
because that's how all my cages are. I have them on coconut, and I have springtails and isopods in there, and they do good. And you know but I'm going. You can't. When I was just talking to Nick Mutton about this, and he said you can't leave a python turd in there. It's never going to get broken down. Obviously, from a bigger species.
Yeah, like I had a California king snake in a 4-foot tub that I had set up as bio adjacent with a bunch of big canyon isopods in there, and about the only thing I ever had to clean up were the sheds. Like the urates and the poop, that was almost entirely taken care of by a very large but a healthy colony of the isopods. So for something like a rhino rat snake that would theoretically eat a little bit more often, depending on the time of the year, because they're definitely more of a seasonal animal, than say like a python or even like a bearded dragon. Although bearded dragon with isopods is always still kind of weird. I know some people have done it, but it always freaks me out.
Yeah.
That would definitely be one that it would have a better, more closer to bioactive ecosystem where you don't have to play with it too much other than like yanking a shed. I would assume.
Yeah, all my sheds go into my my isopod breeding bin. They love eating that until they get to the belly scales. They seem to leave those behind.
Yeah, yeah. I end up with just like sitting there, like sifting through dirt and like pulling out the little scales for
it's
like a long, long time.
it's annoying. So what temps do you recommend for the rhino rats?
They are definitely a cooler species. So usually, what I like to tell if someone was getting into it, think crested gecko, where it's more of room temp, to where you want like in the low to mid 70s to mid 80s at most. They will bask, but it's mostly if they are either very chilly or to get ultraviolet light is really how they bask. Because usually, oftentimes when I feed them, I don't see them for the next couple days after they have been fed. They'll either be perched up in a super, super far corner away from the light, away from the glass, or they will be buried in a cork tube or on the ground under a hide for the first couple days. So theoretically, they're not seeking out that basking spot to kind of help speed up their metabolisms and digest that prey item. Just kind of think room temps or a cool weather reptile, where like 85 is the highest you would ever want to go. And I have had success from hatchlings to my adults, keeping them that way.
Okay. Do you cycle your temps to breed them? Like
I do.
give them a drop?
They do. So as I kind of mentioned previously in the podcast, where my building goes through an actual just natural cycle, the room that I keep them in has an additional AC unit in there, and it's tucked away in the very back part of the building where the sun hits it the least. So even in the winter, when I turn that AC off, it will dip down into the 60s on its own. And essentially, none of them have supplemental heat. They all just have ultraviolet light and for the ones in cages, a small wattage halogen bulb, to where it really doesn't put off a whole lot of heat. And in the morning, I will see them during like the winter and fall. They'll be up there for about 2 hours or so, and then away from that heat the rest of the day. And I've monitored them throughout the day. So generally these guys, I guess you can consider them more of a springtime breeder, to where they would go through like their winter cooling period, and then come spring, you will feed them more, and then that's when you would pair them up. And that's where I had success with that, where the very first time I bred them, and technically I wasn't even anticipating them to lock up, where I put the male in with the female because a couple people over in Indonesia told me that they actually house them communally, where they'll keep trios together in very, very large, like 6 foot, like a 6x4 enclosures. So that way there's lots of places for them to go. They'll keep trios together. Wow. Although if I remember that calculation right, it's probably not a full 6 feet. It's probably smaller. And so I put the male in with the female, and then because he moved cages, remember I said that they can be a super sensitive species, he stopped eating, and the female was actually eating, like he would take the rat or the mouse and he would drop it, and then the female would eat it. So actually I saw him visibly get skinnier, and I went, nope, you're coming out. And that time, even though I never saw an actual lock from them, that was enough time for them to actually get the stuff done. And so what happened was essentially they went through like what I would probably describe as like if you have a high and low in your room of like morning and night being the coolest and the middle of the day being the hottest, like a 12 to 15 degree drop in temp for a 2 to 3 month period. Once it starts to warm back up, that's usually when they'd be put together. That's how I have done it now successfully, and that's how one of the people that I have got a lot of my info from, that's how he has done it in the past as well.
Okay. Now, would you recommend cycling the temps even if you don't plan to breed?
I think so. It seems like it does that type of animal, their body really good to kind of give themselves like a little soft reset. I know a lot of people that have those like 25-plus-year-old colubrids, they would cycle them regardless if they were breeding or not. So I think it's a good idea. Theoretically, you can give your electricity bill a little bit of a break as well, where you don't have the heat on them all the time. So I don't see why not.
Okay. And what about the night drops? What are the temperatures at night when if you're allowing that to happen? That sort of natural swing.
Typically, for the most part, all of my night drops are about 10 degrees, between 8 and 10 degrees from like the general ambient. So, that room I keep at, during the height of the day, it's like 79 to 82. Then it gets down to 70 to 73.
Okay. What do you use to control, or what would you recommend somebody use to control the temperature? Just using a lower watt bulb, or on a dimmer thermostat, or how would you control that, manipulate that?
I mean, honestly, these guys being more arboreal, I think, unless your house is definitely really cold, I don't think an under tank heat is even necessary. So something that is overhead and very low wattage, and if you're using like a radiant heat panel or something like that, definitely on a thermostat, kept super, super low. But something like just a low wattage halogen, or even like some of those UVB bulbs, they can get pretty warm. They seem to do just okay that way. Like, they really don't need high temps at all. Like, when I say think crested gecko, think crested gecko. Like, how many people keep heat on their crested geckos?
Yeah.
I know a dozen or so crested breeders that none of them have heat on them at all.
Okay.
And that's essentially kind of how I keep the Rhino Rat Snakes, is just with overhead lighting, and primarily it's just UVA, UVB. And then in one that is a little bit taller, it's a 3-foot tall cage, not a 2-foot tall cage, has a low wattage halogen in there. And even then, she's almost never directly under it.
Okay. So with the humidity, what do you recommend for that? Are you monitoring it with a hygrometer, and what would be your target humidity range for them?
Definitely for them, like an ambient of 55 to 65 degrees, or percentage, I shouldn't say degrees, sorry, 55 to 65% humidity. And then if you can give them like a humid hide, definitely a little bit more. So, I have humidifiers in the room that just kind of keep the ambient humidity at about 45. And then inside of the cages, being Colorado, being at high elevation, it's a little hotter, it's a little bit drier. That's where most of them are a mix of coconut, topsoil, and eco earth. So it's a really humidity holding substrate. That's essentially kind of what I use to gauge from there, and I'll just kind of monitor it off and on. I don't have them in there full time, but throughout like my weekly testings and checkings, is I will pop it in there, and I will move them from cage to cage to see what it is. And then roughly it's about 58-ish is probably the average that the actual cages sit in. And then I give them humid hides in addition to that, although they're rarely in those unless they're shedding. So that definitely 55 to 65% humidity.
Do you mist, or do you recommend misting?
I would recommend it if you definitely have a drier area, or like in the winter when your heater's going and it dries out the air more. I don't really need to, because I have humidifiers in the room. Really, all I do is I just take their water dish and I just dump it over if they haven't pooped in their water a couple times a week, and that's really all I do.
Okay.
But definitely, if you have like a screen, like an open air cage, like a screen top Exoterra or Zoom Ed or something, then and you have like a relatively low humidity in whatever room that you're keeping them in, misting or spraying is definitely not a bad idea for sure.
Okay. How often do you change water?
Usually 2 to 3 times a week is when I'll change it. Although if they're pooping in it, then that. And realistically, their water probably doesn't even need to change 3 times a week. But A, I feel fresh water is a very good thing. And B, that's how I help just give the humidity spikes. So just, doop, doop, there we go. I don't have set days for it or anything like that, but
yeah. How do you sanitize your bowls?
I hand wash all of them. So if they are dirty, they get hand washed with soap, and then they get sprayed and dried off, and then they will get sprayed with either F10 or chlorhexidine, and I let those dry, and then they get rinsed again, and then air dried for the final time.
Right on. Would you recommend a bowl big enough for them to get in? Do they soak? Do they like getting in the water?
So that is the part that can be contentious. I have seen both of my females get in water and stay in their water. Specifically, my older one, she was in shed for like a solid month, and then she shed twice and then laid her eggs. It was really weird. But the male I've never seen go in there. However, there is some debate about what the reason why they have that fun little appendage on their nose. A lot of people think it's for luring. So, a lot of people know about the caudal luring of Morellii, of specifically like the green tree pythons, and that one, I think, like Pakistani viper, where they'll sit there and they'll like wiggle it around and like a bird grabs that. Because if you look at the Rhino Rat Snake's nose or the rostrum, it is a little bit of a lighter color, and usually the tip of it is definitely much lighter, sometimes like a yellow to almost white. So maybe it looks like a little grub or something. And so theoretically, they blend in with the foliage of the branches that they're staying in, and a bird comes along and then they grab the bird. But they have seen both in captivity, not often, and in the wild, of usually younger animals with their noses in water. And they will actively eat fish and tadpoles, both in the wild and in captivity. So maybe they're using that nose as luring, but not for birds, but for marine life, not marine life, but underwater prey. And so that's where I think having at least a water dish big enough for them to entirely fit in is probably a good thing. And because I've actively seen them getting into their water, definitely more active water changes of that is also something that I would advocate for as well. That multiple time a week water changes, because they are physically getting into the water. Not always going to the bathroom in it, but man.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's some of their waste on their body and it's getting trailed in there. And yeah.
That's why we always tell people to wash their hands afterwards.
Yeah. So what about day-night cycle? I mean, you sort of already alluded to this. How are you doing that? Are you doing just ambient light coming in the room? Are you providing light? What are your feelings on UVB and snakes?
There is a lot of evidence to suggest that they really don't need UVB because of their diets, essentially, and how they break down that, where the ultraviolet, the UVB light that other reptile species require, they essentially kind of make that up. However, there is also a lot of studies that show that basically every vertebrate species out there, with the exception of like deep cave troglodytes, benefits from UVA, just period. So I do have full spectrum lighting on all of them. They're on a 12-hour day-night cycle on timers. And then in the winter, usually for the first month, I forget. But for about 2 months, I switch it to 14 off, 10 on.
You think that helps with breeding?
Maybe. This year, honestly, I didn't do super well on breeding. I just got a new pair. They're a proven pair. They're a proven pair from the guy that I learned a lot of my stuff from. Like, my girl has had 2 clutches. This girl has had one clutch, and it was a huge one. It was 12 eggs, and every single one hatched, and almost every single one immediately got onto rodents, which is almost unheard of, specifically for this species. But my girl, she did not have a great clutch, but I kept her exactly the same way as before. But she didn't go through her month-long shed cycle. She shed twice, laid a clutch of mostly infertiles, and then a week later laid another single good egg. And it was really weird. And then the other girl just didn't take this year. So I don't know if 100% that would be super, super beneficial. I know that I have produced them with that type of light cycle, and that specifically, even that one female has produced them without that light cycle. However, it was also her first year in a new environment. So that relatively sensitive species, again, like we talked about, that could also be a part of it.
Right on. Ideal enclosure size for an adult animal, what would you recommend?
I would say minimum probably like a 75. Is that right? The 4 by 2 by 18.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, they like to perch. They will go up and down, and they aren't like a GTP that will just kind of go up and down on the perches. They will move all over the enclosure. So giving them plenty of space to move, stretch out. They won't just like S up and curl on a perch. They will sometimes fully stretch out. They like to move around. They like to observe stuff. So giving them plenty of space to do that, I think a 75 would be good.
Or sorry. Are they nocturnal or diurnal?
I would put them in the crepuscular area where they're most active dawn and dusk, where during like the middle of the day, or even like where if you like get home from work at like 5 or 6, more than likely they'd be hunkered down. But in the evenings and in the mornings, that's when they would most often be out. And that's when I've observed them most out, is dawn and dusk essentially. And then the few hours before and after those periods is usually when they're out. That's usually when I'm interacting with them, because it's like the hottest time of the day for them in my room in general. So they're hunkered down anyway. And that's usually when I'm feeding as well, is usually in the late afternoon to early evening.
Do they push at all or anything? Do they do any damage to that?
I've never seen them like really doing the pushing, like, you know, especially like the pushing you see from like boas and stuff. I've never seen that of them. I've seen them certainly like investigate around the edges and the corners of doors, but I've never seen them like sat there and like really work it like that you see some larger species do. But yeah, as far as like what we would probably consider actual pushing, don't think so, or at least I've never seen it.
Okay. Let me see here. Ideal food item. What are you doing exclusively rodents? Do they take any fowl, any little quails or anything like that? Are you doing any kind of fish?
So as adults, I do basically only rodents. Either frozen thaw, like for the big adults, like an adult mouse is basically what I would give them, or like a small like crawler rat would be the biggest size rat I would do. They are a relatively small species, very thin body. Like an adult is probably only like 3.5 feet long, but very thin, and a lot of that is tail. So if you're going to be feeding like quail or something, they would need to be pretty small quail. Like I get that, you know, birds, they compact a lot more, which sounds icky to say out loud. But they do, like a big bird is not a substantial meal for even a smaller snake, but you would still need to find pretty young quail for that. I know as hatchlings, this is the difficult part for keeping rhino rat snakes, period. Like every single breeder that I went to it for advice for just went, is this your first year? You're going to struggle. And I went, great. They like to, remember we talked about like putting their heads in the water. They like to eat fish and like tadpoles and amphibians. So oftentimes to get them going on eating, you have to give them little cups of I don't like to do rosies because they have the thiaminase, and that will kill a snake over time. That's why you've probably ever heard people that just feed rosy reds and goldfish. That's not healthy. So for like all of the snapping turtle people and caiman people, stop it. So you need to get like guppies or mosquito fish or killifish that don't have those thiaminase, or if they do, it's in very small amounts. And then that's what I did for my babies. Is they got little cups of, where essentially I had a separate quarantine tank of, I had 2 tanks set up, one for quarantine and one for active guppies and killifish, where I get new ones and they go in the quarantine tank, and after 2 weeks they'd move into the other one. And then, a couple times a week they would get the little cups of the guppies, and then that's what they would eat. And then eventually you would actually start to float little frozen thawed like day-old mice pinks, and then you move that to just mouse pinks, just like on like in a little, on like a cup or in a lid in the enclosure, and then they would eat that. That's how usually people do that. The guy that I talked to about keeping them communally overseas, he actually keeps green tree frogs, and for particularly pain in the butt babies, he would actually scent them because the green tree frogs aren't toxic. So he would take the green tree frog and he would scent off of the green tree frog. He would take the F&T, the frozen top pink, and he would rub on the green tree frog, and he had gotten success that way. So I even have a couple green tree frogs that I got in anticipation of having problem feeders as well.
Wow.
But it's never come to that.
Okay. So is that, do you ever bring that back? Do you ever give them fish or amphibians, or do you just try to avoid that? Because, I mean, is there a possibility they might go off the rodents then?
That's definitely a possibility. I have never attempted to do so, mostly because I would have to, I'd have to look to see what type of like fish that I could even give like an appropriate size meal for. Theoretically, like a silver side would be okay, but they're also super high in salt, so you wouldn't actually want to use a silver side for a snake. Yeah. So I would have to look into what I could use as an alternative, like maybe something like the frog Reptilinks. That would actually probably be pretty good. I know a lot of people will do like frog legs, or for, like you've seen a lot of people for larger species of snakes, they'll give like the drumsticks and stuff. That's fine, but they need to hold prey items. So just giving like a false water cobra or a crebo, or in this case, a Rhino Rat Snake, just like frog legs or drumsticks, or whatever, that isn't a viable staple diet for them, or a healthy diet. So maybe as like a treat or something just to see if they could, but a Reptilink probably could. But I haven't attempted it just because they do well as established adults on rodents.
Okay. How often are you feeding in that first year of life?
Basically every 5 to 7-ish days. It takes sometimes 18 to 28 months for them to go through their autogenic change, but probably during that first 12 months, I would be offering food, in the case of fish, like 2 to 3 smaller fish, like guppies or killifish or whatever, every 5 to 7 days. And then once they switch over to actual mice, once every 7 to 10-ish days, the way you would kind of any other snake species. Okay, and then so basically the same schedule.
Okay. Oh, okay. So they just have sort of a higher metabolism. You kind of feed them more, or about the same amount as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Most of the colubrids, if you keep them on that weekly schedule, they're usually pretty good. Some are definitely not. Like, an indigo will eat every day if you let it.
Okay.
But
right on. I think this is the first colubrid care guide we're doing. So
yeah, it's definitely weird when you think of just like, your base feeding schedule when you're a python person versus even a boa person, and then you have colubrids. So, like, do you remember I said I have my spreadsheets of feeding charts? I have a colubrid, and then I have a colubrid every 5 days for my youngers and my indigo that will just eat constantly.
Yeah. How big's your indigo?
She's probably like 5-ish feet long. The girls don't usually get nearly as large. And even then, those like giant, like 7, 8, and 9 foot big males, those are super few and far between. And honestly, even because we have 3 Eastern indigo breeders in my state, so I never really have to worry about getting the interstate commerce permits. Probably gonna have to figure something out for the black pine snakes, but we'll see about that. Most of them, their big males are usually only about 6 feet.
Okay.
But they'll just eat all of the time. And like, if you ever want to come back and revisit or get one of my associates and talk about dry marcon and like crepos and indigos, they're a whole other type of snake. They're really silly.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. What are some potential health problems you can run into with the rhino rats?
Theoretically, because we're not getting any wild caughts, primarily what you would run into is health issues related to stress, either stressing out, period, or them going off of food, and then potentially developing respiratory issues for people who are trying to achieve, those lower temps but higher humidities. So you know how a lot of people can struggle with a rainbow boa, trying to do essentially that exact same thing. The same situation where those lower temps, which slow down metabolisms, which slows down the immune response, with that higher stagnant condition, which leads to bacterial growth, which can lead to infection. Essentially that. So basically stress or poor husbandry because of usually cool temps and stagnation. And that's really the only issues that I could possibly think of. However, they are a smaller bodied colubrid, and egg binding is definitely a potential issue as well if you are looking to breed them. Typically, they're not super large colubrid eggs, but it's definitely a possibility.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the Rhino Rat Snake Care Guide. I appreciate it, man.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, a couple things came up while we were doing that, and I totally forgot to ask you, what kind of lizards do you keep?
Not that many, because remember I said that I forget stuff.
Yeah.
So I
and you
used
can't
to have
forget a lizard.
yeah, exactly. I used to have a lot more species of amphibians and frogs. Like I had like 3 species of salamander and like a dozen frogs and a bunch of different lizards. But I just essentially I gave a lot of them away or weaned them off of the collection just because it's just me 99% of the time, and I have too many to do by myself, plus the other aspects of the ranch. So for just lizards right now, we have the Argentine tegus. We have 2 big boys.
Oh, wow.
We have 2 northern blue tongue skinks. Theoretically, it's a pair, but I don't really care too much to try to breed them, as well as blue tongue breeding is horribly violent. Like legs can get off. Yeah, it's not great. Usually they'll just kind of grab on, but if they are in fact 2 boys, not good. And then I have my old Aki just recently passed away, so we don't have him anymore. We have the Blue Tree Monitor that hopefully does okay. She was given to us through like essentially like a breakup / no longer doing it anymore type of deal. And she was left without heat or UVB for almost a month.
Oh, no.
And so she is not great, and I'm doing my best. So hopefully she recovers. Like, she's eating off of tongs, which I guess she has never done before, just period. So we have her. So blue tongues, the tegus, the blue tree. We have a sandfish, or the little sand skink. And then I have 2 just ancient African fat-tailed geckos.
Really?
Like, they are 13 years old.
Wow.
I used to have whenever you're doing like care guides and stuff, you'll always get people yelling at you because how you're doing it wrong. I was admittedly doing it entirely the wrong way, but they were always fine. I had a reverse trio for 9 years of African fat-tailed geckos. I got them as almost fully adults, so about a year old, and it was supposed to be a trio. But it turned out it was 2 boys and a female. And they housed perfectly fine their entire lives. A a lot of times people said like, well, if you changed up the enclosure, if you moved them, they would fight. Never did. Eventually we did lose one boy, and now we just have the two, the male and the female, and they are at least at 13 years old.
Wow.
Yep.
Cool. How do you keep the blue tongues? That's one I'm up in the air whether I want to get a lychee or a blue tongue.
Well, I've kept lychees before. They poop a lot. And they like to, and if they bite, they will draw blood. Oh, and I forgot. I also have, because I'll answer your northern, but I'm forgetting. I have so many all the time. I have a few Cresties, and I have 2 gargoyles that were my partner's project. But as she got busier and busier with like her own business, running her own business out of 3 cities across the state, and working with like a nonprofit, and then doing the financial and bookkeeping of my business, she just kind of, it fell to me, and it's become more of a chore, which is not something you want. So whittling that down. And then I have a crimson day gecko and a standing gecko.
Oh, wow.
So all those. So like I said, like 40-ish plus species. And then, so back to the northerns. They are kept in 4x2x18 Zen habitats, which honestly, I don't super like the Zen habitats. But they work for more arid type species. So like the bulls, the pines, the male woma, and oh yeah, I forgot I have womas and blackhead pythons too. Sorry.
Oh, well, you definitely mentioned the blackhead. I don't think you mentioned the woma.
Yeah, that was a whole thing this year too.
You picked them up this year?
Huh?
You picked up the womas this year?
No, I've had them for a while. It was the first year I bred them, and the female got really bad egg bound. And I called every vet that I trusted that could do a surgery on an exotic between me and Denver, and even then on opposite ends of the Denver metro area. And only one answered the call back, and it was my old one, honestly, the one I recommend to most people, but it was 4 hours away. So I'd immediately just like drop everything, make sure the goats were penned up, and haul off to Denver. And she had to have the eggs removed. But essentially what happened was she laid 2 eggs. They unfortunately went bad. And the third egg was like this. It was turned, and it got stuck in the oviduct, and it backed up before then. And so she, I try to do my best. Like, you get the calcium shots, you do the other shot. You can sit there and try to aspirate the eggs, where you actually physically drain the eggs through. That's actually how I ended up getting my indigo. Was she's essentially a retired breeder, because that had to happen with her. So she's not breeding again, where nothing was really coming out of the eggs. And I found out why. Turns out that first egg that was like this, and the next one up that was still kind of cocked, but probably could have passed, those might have been in her from the last time she had eggs, which was 3 years ago.
Wow.
And I got them as a confirmed pair, like she had just had eggs. And the guy was like, I got my eggs, I don't want them anymore. And so we ended up with them, and she had a really hard time bouncing back. Like, it took her almost a full year to like fully recover and get close to an ideal body type again. And now we know why. So now, while the vet seemed like it's definitely a real possibility that she could breed again, I don't really like to endanger the lives of my animals. So I have like a $2,000 WOMA, if we're counting the vet bills, that will potentially be in the ambassador program from here forth. And then I might need to go find another female WOMA, because we're technically taking care of another WOMA for another education facility, but she will eat him. Like she is like, the bad rep that Aspidites have. She earned it.
Yeah,
100%. She's awful.
Does she try to eat you too?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She's a little monster. 100%. Yeah. Like, remember I said that my female blackhead will chew? That's only like if I have my hands on her and I'm not letting her go. My hand goes anywhere near inside of that cage, she's flying across it and nailing, wrapping, and going to town. So that's definitely a hands-off snake.
Yeah, their feed response is incredible.
Yeah. She's the only one like that. Like the other two womas, they'll hit, but it's almost like working with a boa where there's definitely a lot of force behind there, but like the intensity isn't. Like hers is on a whole other level. It's crazy.
Hmm.
What were we talking about? Oh,
Blue
blue
tongue.
tongues.
Yep.
So the cage, they get the UVA UVB light. I know that a lot of people have kept them just like in a rack system or without that. I put lights on everything if I can. I'm like the worst ball python breeder ever because I do the same thing. They are kept on like cypress, eco earth, coconut bedding.
That might make you the best ball python breeder ever. I don't know.
The least economic ball python
Yeah.
breeder because I give the females years off too, like because I'm a boa guy originally, and I still end up keeping a lot of those tendencies with my pythons, and even sometimes I'll forget to feed the colubrids as probably often as they would like to too. Never like starving them out or anything, but they would be okay eating more often than I do feed them, which potentially is maybe why the northern pine snakes didn't go this year. But so on a bedding mixture that can retain humidity, it generally doesn't too much because they're in that open air zen habitat top. I give them a pretty big water dish. They don't really get into it a lot, but they do drink fairly often. Like for a lizard, they do drink pretty often. And I was wondering if it was because like I'm keeping it too dry for them, but people keep them on like straw and paper, so I know I'm doing okay humidity wise, and they don't have any shedding issues. They still have all their toes. Lots of cover, lots of like large hides for them to get into, and they don't bury too much, but they will kind of like dig down a little bit to make it to where they can easily come and go under like cork bark and like large flats that I have in there for them. And then just kind of varied diets. They will get like the skink diet from like Zoom Ed. I will find limited ingredient cat food, like wet cat food. They'll get that. They will get bugs. Occasionally they'll get like, one of the baby colubrids didn't eat, so they'll get like, a frozen thaw pinky or hopper mouse occasionally. I would make like little balls for the tegus of like organ meats, ground meat, vegetables, fruit, and then calcium and vitamin supplements. I would make like little meat veggie lizard balls for the tegus. I would give them like a smaller kind of version of that for them as well because they're omnivores in the wild. Because if I just gave them straight greens, most of the time they wouldn't want to eat that. So if I mixed in the greens, same like with like the tegus, if I want to give them greens or like a little bit of fruit, I would mix it in with the meatballs for the tegus, and I would give them that as well. But primarily, it seems like the female will eat anything, no matter what I throw in there. The male is super, super picky. He likes dubias, he likes crickets, and he likes the skink diet. And he will turn his nose up at the meatball a lot of the time. He will turn his nose up to the limited ingredient cat food a lot of the time. He will turn his nose up to just straight fish. He'll turn his nose up to just straight like chicken parts. He's super, super picky. I don't know what his problem is.
Yeah, it seems like they can really eat a ton of stuff, and just a lot of people food, which is kind of nice.
Yep, it is. I do a lot of ground meat, but you always have to remember because it's not that whole prey item. You always have to make sure you add a lot of the calcium and vitamin supplements into there, and you're not doing that all of the time.
Yeah. How do you handle, we had brought this up. I made a note. How do you handle pushing with boas?
I've done it a couple different ways. And sometimes it has required like them having to go to the vet because they get like an abscess on there. Most of the time it's, they can't see, like they want to see out. Sorry, one of my dogs. She's in heat, so she's super upset at me right now. They want to see out, or it's a boy trying to get to the girls. And so usually what I do is if I notice they're doing it all the time, I'll see if cause some of them are still in tubs, like it'll kind of fog up a little bit. I will reduce down the amount of bedding that it's in there, or I'll put them onto paper for a little while to make sure that they're not pushing a whole lot. Or in the case of boys, I'll just pull them out more often. And that seems to kind of subside that. But primarily, that's usually the reason why that I've noticed that, at least it seems to me, why they are in fact pushing is they just want to be able to see what's going on, or boys are trying to get to the girls, is what I have always seen. And the only time that it was a real issue was I had just finished a full mite treatment. Like, I had a scare, and so I did the full 3-month process of doing mites, and so everybody was going back on the bedding, and so it's super fogged up when I put in the new Reptile, and a girl hit the front of a tub really hard, and it abscessed actually inside of her mouth, and it got really bad, and she had a hard time recovering, and so she's actually one of the few snakes that I still have on paper because she will just impact all of the time.
Wow.
Retic will also impact, which affects the respiratory and everything like that, so she's on paper too. And then the other one was male IMG boa, where he really wanted to get to the girls, and he was rubbing really bad to where it did kind of, it'll bubble up and abscess a little bit. That required us to delay our vacation by 2 days, get him into the vet last minute, and then get a different person who was going to house it, come and visit to give antibiotic shots while we were gone.
Wow. That's a big ask. That's a good friend.
I miss him a lot. He moved out to middle of nowhere, Texas, and he is a really, really good guy.
Yeah. The whole reason I ask is my Argentine, right now she's trying to get out, and it's whenever I'm in the room, she wants to come out. It's if there's movement in here, she wants to come out, and she'll pace and try to find a way to come out. And then usually if I take her out, let her cruise around on the floor for a little bit and then put her back, she's good for the day. I don't know.
Yep.
It's so annoying.
Maybe you should reach out to Lori after we're done here, for another one, because she's that behaviorist. And that is one of the things that she definitely pays a lot of attention to, and will definitely be able to give a much better answer, and definitely a more educated answer than what I'll probably throw out there. Mm-hmm. But it does seem to me, just kind of based on the behavior, when I see it a lot with my boas, and I see it a lot with the Pituophis, where they just they see movement, and even though I'm in there all the time, it doesn't necessarily even just associate us with food. They just want to know what's going on and to be aware of it. And I don't know if it's a stress reducer, okay, this isn't anything bad, I'm more comfortable now, or they just, they get wanderlust and they want to go off somewhere or not. But it does seem like once they get an interaction and actually get a little bit of movement to them, it seems like they're good, which probably adds to the whole thing of where, regardless of how we're keeping them, more than likely they need time out from the cage, where the cage actively is their true microclimate, and interacting with us, or the little play pens with stuff in there, or the retrofitted cat trees and stuff for them to climb on and interact with, is something that needs to be done a whole lot more for probably every species, just kind of period.
Yeah. Cause it is cause I'll peek through my office door. They're French doors, and I'll peek through and I'll see her just chilling there. But if I come in the room, then all of a sudden she starts moving around. And if I open the door up and just give her some pets on her head, she'll even just chill out then, or she'll just come out and try to get up onto my shoulders. And so she's very social. She's definitely, out of all my snakes, she is I haven't seen anything like it. She's the most social.
That's remember the snake I told you that impacted really badly, the boa? That is the most, what seems to be friendliest snake, people oriented, calmest, amiable animal that I have, period.
Yeah.
That's the snake that, she's not huge, because I don't power feed the boas. She's maybe only 5.5 feet long. But she's just been a doll her entire life. And that's kind of the way I've seen with a lot of the boas, where once they're comfortable and they know that you're not a threat and they know what's going on, they're usually very chill. They're very calm. They don't climb everywhere.
Yeah, her first week she was a little huffy, very
Yep.
head shy, and then once she got used to me, now it's the exact opposite. She just constantly wants to interact in one way or another without putting too much of my human emotion into her. You know, that's the way it feels to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole like empathizing with reptiles thing. I know there's a big thing where you're trying to humanize and anthropomorphize animals, which honestly I think you have to some degree, but there's definitely a line that goes into the dangerous aspects, both for our aspects and theirs. But it's hard not to empathize just because of how we are wired. And even though it's hard for most people to empathize with any reptile, let alone animals that don't have lips, hands, feet, eyelids, ears, anything, you can definitely still see that they are feeling or wanting one thing or another, and certainly comfortable with situations more than others. And that's where I think that, to full circle it back to the nose rubbing and the pushing thing, is they are just seeking something out there. And it seems like a lot of the time what they're seeking is just either mental stimulation, or just kind of maybe even reassurance about like the environment that they can see but they can't necessarily get to.
Yeah,
Maybe.
absolutely. Can you give me a quick rundown of what other animals you keep on the ranch? Every time you say ranch, I'm thinking like, man, and then you said goats, and now I'm
Yeah.
curious.
So essentially what we have are, we have the main snake building. That's where every animal other than the green tree and our quarantine is. We have an attached, it was a chicken coop, and that is where the tortoises are, with the exception of, oh yeah, I forgot I have iguanas too. My bad. Uh, in the reptile building, we have two green iguanas, a rock iguana, a rhinoceros rock iguana, sorry. And then we have a pair of redfoot tortoises and one Russian tortoise because he picks on the sulcatas. He's a dick.
Mm.
And yes, they are all cohabitating, and they are in a huge cage where the iguanas can be 8 feet in the air if they want to. I used to have elevated feeding platforms, and I stopped because they would just drop from the top and they would just land on the ground and eat with the tortoises. Um, they're really weird. One is a Petco rescue who had missing parts of her tail and feet because of fungal infection, and then the other one is potentially an intersex female, or she just has a lot of exaggerated male characteristics,
Huh.
where she's larger. She's like in between the size of a big female and like a medium sized male. She has pronounced dewlap, pronounced spikes. She head bobs, but she lays eggs.
Whoa.
Yep. And then the rhino iguana, I don't have like that super, super awesome tight bond that they sometimes have. But when she fronts on me, she immediately figures out it's me, and then she doesn't eat my shoes anymore. So that's always good. But then outside of the building, to answer your actual question that I forget a lot, we have the tortoises. In there, we have two sulcata tortoises, Toaster and Pothole. Pothole is his name because we used to have Speed Bump.
Mm.
And then we just have a new little baby pancake tortoise and a leopard tortoise. That eventually the leopard tortoise will get big enough where he'll move down with the sulcatas. It'll just be the pancake tortoise. He's in like a 4-foot trough. And pancake tortoises are weird. They're basically an arboreal tortoise. Only instead of climbing on trees, they just climb rock faces. Like they can go like 70 degrees up. It's crazy.
Wow.
And they're almost like a box turtle diet too. They'll actually eat meat as well. And then, so that's the little thing, the little tortoise house. There is the pond that has goldfish and rosies and minnows and shiners. And there is a perpetual population of leopard frogs and woodhouse toads that occupy there, because we have an artesianal well. The water's just always running, so they built a pond. And there is essentially a drainage field for that in what is my southeast pasture. And that's where like a little ditch runs, and that's where the woodhouse toads, that's where they spawn and do their thing. There is a red-tailed hawk nest just on the other side of my property line, which is why I have to have bird netting over the top of my birds. And I have ducks and turkeys. Turkeys, just run-of-the-mill, straight-run turkeys. And then we have mostly Muscovy ducks. Have you ever seen those ducks that are like really big that have like the funky red faces?
Oh, yeah.
That's them. Like in Florida, you've actually probably seen them.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
We have mostly Muscovy ducks, and then we have just like mixes of other ducks. And then we have goats. We have Swiss milking goats. We have Nigerian dwarf does. And then we have what were supposed to be like super people-friendly petting goats. But as it turns out, they're super scared of people, and their actual breeding, when we got them, their mixes were nothing what they're supposed to be. So they're actually the biggest goats we have. They're like 90 pounds.
Whoa.
And there are goats that are like the Boer goats that can, like the meat goats, those can get over 100 pounds. They're actually it was supposed to be like a mini Nubian and Kiko. And even then, Kikos can be pretty big. And Nigerian dwarf mix, and turns out they're Boer mixes. And so they're like the floppy-eared goats, but they're like 3.5 feet tall instead of like 1.5 feet like they're supposed to be.
Wow.
And then we breed livestock guarding dogs. We're working on establishing a new type of breed, which is called a Grand Koromak, where like instead of like a lot of dog breeds, they have a huge area that they just kind of keep track of. We're trying to breed them to stick with the actual animals. And so we have our two pair, and then we have 3 kids remaining. One is a female that could go off to just like pet home at all. And then we have 2 boys that they'll be a year old like next week, that one of the other people on the board that we're working with is going to come and do another behavioral assessment to see whether or not they should try to continue to be part of the new breed assessment, or they'll be neutered. So we'll have to see.
That's pretty cool.
So we got a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. And you said you're at 9,000 foot elevation?
Where I am at in the valley, I'm at like 74. There are parts of the valley. We're in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. So have you ever heard of the Great Sand Dunes National Park?
No.
That's okay. It's the largest sand dunes outside of the Sahara or Mongolia.
Wow.
It's a huge thing. Like they're huge high peaks. It's just sand. And I'm relatively close to there, but it's a high alpine desert area. So we're at a high elevation, but it's a desert as well. So essentially we are surrounded by mountains in a valley, but depending on where you are, we're kind of close to the middle of it. I think the lowest elevation in the valley is like 6,800, and the highest points closer to like where you'll start to actually go back into the mountains to leave it. Those towns are like 9,000 feet.
Wow. My wife and I were out there just about 2 years ago, and we stayed in Bailey. I don't know how far that is from you.
It's a decent distance. Like, I don't know if this is going to stay on the full podcast or not at this point, but so like, you know where Denver and I-25 runs, where everybody lives, and
Yeah.
Bailey is like an hour and 45 minutes west of Denver.
Okay. Yep.
If you were to continue going past Bailey, like through Conifer, out to like where the fictional town of South Park is, you'll hit you'll keep kind of going. That's where Buena Vista is, and that's a fun like little mountain town. It's not a ski town, but it's like a little mountain getaway kind of like summer vacation place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about an hour and 45 minutes south of there. So from DIA, like not DIA because that's like another 45 minutes from downtown. So like from Denver proper, I am about 3 hours and 45 minutes away from Denver. And so from Bailey, you're looking at about a 2.5-ish hour drive from Bailey.
Right on. All right, man. Well, where can everybody find you at? Instagram? What are the platforms you're on?
I'm on Instagram, but honestly, I'm not super great about posting on there. And then I guess they actually just recently changed the algorithm to now they're really only going to be pushing paid paid pages, so I don't know how often you'll find me there. But I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook for whatever reason, mostly the cookies thing, and then on YouTube. I've tried to do TikToks. I'm really bad at the daily small format updating, but I'm on TikTok as well. I don't think there's really any need for me to have like a Discord, or like it'd be weird to do Twitch streaming and I'm just like feeding snakes. Do people do that?
You could be the first.
I would be the first. I don't know, maybe. Here I come, Purple App. But yeah, so Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, a little bit TikTok, I guess, for however long that stick around.
You what are you working on right now with YouTube? Any big care guide videos or anything?
So I am working on a couple people gave me some pretty good ones. Someone asked if I could do like a compare and contrast retic and green anaconda. I mean, technically I just have the boy, but I also don't have him right now. So that's kind of on the back burner a little bit. But someone asked if I could talk about like the different racer stakes of North America, if I could talk about some of the more like almost micro type of snakes that are sticking around that I've doctored a little bit. And I'm currently working on a species spotlight. Like I have finished scripting, and then theoretically this afternoon, I'm going to at least do the me talking point. We'll see whether or not he'll be up for actually part of like the B-roll, because he's still pretty small, a greenish rat snake video. Not too many people know about the greenish rat snakes, because there are green rat snakes in North America. They're mostly down in Texas and in Mexico, but this is the greenish rat, which is basically the only non-contested hybrid snake that we actively accept in the hobby. Like every other thing, every other hybrid that you know of, or every other pure snake that more than likely has hybridization or natural intergrades or anything like that, we're always fighting about, you know, BCI, BI, different carpet pythons, Tesseracorn snakes more than likely are Cali King hybrids way back when. This is the only one that naturally occurs that we're all just like, yeah, it's a greenish, and that no one fights about.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing a species spotlight on that one currently.
Cool.
I have other ideas for other ones as well, but I really like to have a little bit more experience with that species, as well as an opportunity to get really good footage of them, because I don't just like going to YouTube and screen grabbing it. If I can, I would prefer not to do that.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check out your Argentine boa video. I'm surprised I didn't find that one.
That's all good. It's relatively new, but yeah, relatively. I think it was this year or like very end of last year. But other than these last few weeks, which has just been, oh, hey, Jess, just insanely busy. I put out 2 full-time, like full videos, and then sometimes shorts as well. So it can get buried if you're not like actively on there all the time.
I think you're one of the most underrated like reptile YouTube channels. You put out good positive vibes. You've got, you know, a lot of people that interact with you in the comments and everything, and talk with you, and a lot of engagement, and you put so much work and thought into your videos, and it really comes across, and I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you. And yeah, no, it's absolutely, every time I have a chance to, you know, just talk shop and talk reptiles for a while, I'm actually going to do it. Like I said previously, if I can just talk for hours about reptiles, I will. You know, at reptile shows, even if I, you know, don't make any money and end up spending it all on a hotel, at least I got to talk reptiles for a weekend. So it's still not a bad time.
Yeah, heck yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you.